Let's discuss methods in C#. A method is a group of statements that together perform a task. Every C# program has at least one class with a method named main. As you've noticed in our ASP.NET Core application, the entry point for the application is public static void main. This is where our application runs and starts up. So this is the entry point, and it's the main method of the application. We can also create methods inside of our custom classes. So right here, I already have a constructor, my second constructor, and there's a bunch of components related to creating our methods. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to specify the access of our method. So the first thing I'm going to put right here, public. The access specifier determines the visibility of the method to another class. If we set it to public, then it can be reused in other classes. Then what we want to do is we want to associate the return type. A method return type is a data type of the value the method returns. If it is not returning any value, then it is set to void. So in this case, let's create an int return type. We can give our method a custom naming convention. So let's just name this first int. And then from there, we can also pass parameters if we want to this method, and then set those parameters to global variables if we want. But in this case, I'm not going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to have that, and then I'm going to do an opening and closing parentheses. You'll notice here that there's an error. Not all code paths return a value. In this case, with return methods, it must return a value, and it must return a value that associates to the same data type as we have integer here. So what we can do is we can say return, and what we're going to return is our property. So our property, let's put it my int. And the reason we can return my int is that if we call the second constructor right here, it's setting the parameters to the global property. And since I have it in the constructor when I call this constructor, I can return my int. The other way to implement a method is to come down here and we can say public void my void. And then inside of this, we can just write out some text. We don't have to actually return any type to this. Typically, you'll use void to perform some action that you don't want to return anything with. So in this case, I could just come over here. I can say console.writeLine. And in this case, I can just say write to the console. These are the two different ways to implement methods in C#. You can either do a return type that associates to a data type, or you can implement a void method that does not return any value, it just performs some action. And another way you can also do this, like I stated before, let's do a public so that it's accessible outside of this. So let's do public string first string method. And then we can come in here and say string my string. And then what we can do here is we can say, hey, we just want to return my string. So whatever is in that parameter is going to be returned by this method. So when we call this method, then we will return it. So now let's go to our C# controller. And what we can do, I'm going to initiate another instance of our class. So what I can do here is I can go first class. Let's say my object2, and I'm not going to initiate it there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside of my C# controller constructor, and I'm going to set my object2. This is another way you can initiate it. New first class, and I'm going to initiate the other constructor. I'm not going to use the one that doesn't have any parameters. I'm just going to put, for my int, I'm going to put 12. My string, I'm going to put first, and for my double, I'm going to put 12.25. And this is going to implement and initiate those values when I call this. So what do we have here? Let's see what we have. We have one overload method. Oh, I put this as a string. So there. Now we've passed our integer, we passed the string value, and we passed the double value. So now once I've set those, anything that I call on my object2, any of those methods or any of the values that I want to return from that, once I set to the constructor, I can. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here. I'm going to take this out of my view, and I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say down here, my object2 And then look at all of this that I have available. If we go back to our first class, we have 3 methods that we created. We have myFirstInt that returns myInt. We also have firstString method that passes a parameter and returns that. And then we have the myVoid that just writes out to the console. So let's go down here and let's put myObject2. And then let's call that method firstInt. So once we call firstInt right there, what's going to happen is that this, whether it's returned, whether you're going to set it to a value, whatever you're going to do with this is going to return firstInt, which in my first class is going to return myInt, which we initialized in our constructor. So myInt is associated with the local parameter set to the global property that we have in first class. So what's going to be set there is the integer value of 12. So this is going to return 12. Now, what we can do is put myObject2. And we can come over here and we can say firstString method. And in my firstString method, we're going to sit here and put hello first. So now this value, whether you set it to a variable, whatever you're going to put it as, and typically what you could do, you can reuse those objects. Let's say we're going to just say var value. We're going to just set a local parameter and initialize it as a string. And then what I can do is take that value and set it to the value of my method. So here, I could copy this and put it right there. And now the value is set to whatever's returned here, which is hello first. So now we've utilized our firstInt method, and we've also utilized the myObject2 firstString method. The last one that we're going to implement is a void type. And as you can see in the void type, we have myVoid as the method. So we got to set the myObject2. myVoid. We're just going to set that right there. And this is going to write out to the console whatever is implemented from this method. And what is being implemented from this method? It's just writing to the console, write to the console. So this is the way to implement methods in C#. You first have to initialize the access specifier to determine whether it's public, private, internal. Do you want to allow this method to be used in other classes? Typically what you'll do is you will set a property to private, and then you will utilize that property and set a public method so that the property cannot be manipulated within the code, just the method can be public. You want to do that so the property cannot be manipulated, just the method being called inside of your class file. So this is typically what you'll do. You set that to private and then have a public method, then call that public method within your different methods or within your application anywhere you want it to be. So there, we've set our firstInt method, which is just returning the property associated inside of our first class, which is myInt, which is being passed to the constructor of first class. So I initiated a second object of my first class instance. So right here, I've created myObject equals new first class. I didn't initialize the first class myObject2. I initialized it inside of my C# controller. Then I set an instance of that object to my firstInt method, which is returning the first parameter, which is 12. Then I'm creating a variable, which is initializing as a string, a var type, and then I'm setting it to myObject2 firstString method, which is passing a parameter from the first class, which is associated with myString, and it's returning myString. So in this case, value is going to equal hello first. And then the last method that I implement is myVoid, which is associated with a void type not returning any property. So the data type and the return is not necessary inside of a void type. The only thing that's being implemented is console.writeLine, which is writing to the console. If you were implementing a console app right here, this would write out to the console, write to the console. This is the different methods we can associate in C#. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.